correct me if I'm not on the right track here, but it's even, ever since I saw The Matrix, one of the idea of an external world has always, the idea that we are measuring something outside of ourselves, when you could just as easily do the thought experiment that, this could be a simulation, is the most simple way to put it. And to say, how would I distinguish between fantasy of my own mind, totally solipsistic, and it's just me, versus there is something outside of myself? And the answer that I don't know. I just, it's an axiom that I have, which is that there's a world outside of myself, and I treat it as separate from me. Well, but I can't prove it.
Right. So this takes us into the whole materialistic paradigm. Basically, modern science has a paradigm of reality, what I call materialism, or you could call it scientific materialism. Other ways of calling it would be, atheism also is a big part of it. Mechanism, reductionism. So basically, what do all these isms boil down to? All of them kind of combine together into the modern scientific framework or paradigm. It assumes fundamentally that the world or the universe is a objective thing that exists in 3 or 4 dimensions, or however many dimensions, doesn't really matter. But it assumes that it's an objective thing which exists independent of our consciousness. And that consciousness, or the mind, is some sort of much higher level, much later emergent phenomenon that comes about billions of years into the evolutionary process.
So there's like 13 billion years of pre-existing universe, and then consciousness flips on whatever million or billion years ago, and we can, through whatever cosmic background radiation, figure out that there was a time when consciousness did not exist, and that was just an emergent property of these organisms surviving. Yeah.
So another key assumption there is that consciousness is something that living beings do. So for example, if you tell a modern scientist or physicist that, what about a rock being conscious, they'll laugh at you, right? Because they assume that consciousness comes from the brain, from the neurons. Obviously, we know this. We can put an EEG on you and see that, if we shoot you in the head, your brain will die, and consciousness, all the indicators of consciousness will go to zero, and so yada yada yada, is standard sort of materialistic explanations of stuff. And so there's an assumption that consciousness is something living beings generate, which turns out to be a flawed assumption. It's not really questioned very much. There's other assumptions. So there's assumptions that
can you talk about how someone might? I mean, if the answer is psychedelics, but I'm curious if there's just a thought experiment that someone can do to get to that level of skepticism that living beings aren't the only things that are generating consciousness via their brains.
Right. So. This gets very tricky. Consciousness is very tricky. So I have to issue a caveat here for the audience, is that at times it might seem like I'm making outrageous claims. Sometimes I make very radical epistemic or metaphysical claims about reality or consciousness, and you might wonder, why is he saying this? What is his evidence? What is his proof for saying this? And you might think that I'm talking from a position of dogma, as though this is some sort of ideology that I have or beliefs that I have adopted. So you have to really clearly distinguish here between beliefs or ideology, or speculations you have, or maybe the way you think reality is, versus direct consciousness of what is actually true. So these are two very different things, and I'd like you to open your mind to the possibility that, yes, you can adopt all sorts of beliefs about the nature of reality, and those can be right or wrong. But what I'm really more interested in is direct consciousness of absolute truth, what's absolutely true. So most people don't have this even in their mind as a possibility, that you can have beliefs or ideas or scientific models on this side over here. That's one thing. And then you have direct consciousness of absolute truth, which is over here, which is a separate thing. And so just keep in mind that maybe this is possible. Maybe right now you don't know how this is possible, or why you can be so certain that it's different from this stuff over here, but it is possible. And so what I'm talking about is direct experiences of consciousness. And so, I want to flag that as something I know that we're developing. But so the problem with these conversations is that they're going to sort of multiply, and there's going to be all these different threads we can follow up on. But let's just a flag to come back to is how does one know, directly
the direct versus what I think everybody, there's the map and there's the territory. And I think a lot of my audience goes, the map is not the territory. And I get that. How do I become the territory? How do I become one with it? So it sounds like we need to lay some groundwork.
Well, many people by this point are familiar with the map is not the territory. It was popularized by NLP and others. It's an Alfred Korzybski phrase. It's a great phrase. It's a beautiful phrase. It's an important phrase that many scientifically minded people don't fully appreciate, because most scientists, this is another problem with the materialistic paradigm, is that it sort of splits the map from the territory, and it works with maps, and it forgets all about the territory. Like, you can get so obsessive about making maps of reality that you just make maps and maps and maps. Just imagine a cartographer who spends his whole life just making maps. And then after 50 years of doing that, he even forgets that the maps correspond to anything real. Mm-hmm. He's just lost in the maps.
Yeah. And so for those of you who haven't heard this phrase, maybe it's the idea that when we look out and you look out into your room or the world, that you have models of how things work. And, you flip the light switch and the lights turn on. And you often don't engage without all of that overlay. And because the map is useful for navigating a territory and it gets you to where you want to go. But we often forget, and sometimes can just, like somebody who's playing a video game and is just like I do with some of these games, don't even look at the video game. I'm in the bottom right-hand corner just maneuvering through this map. We forget that there's a territory that it's supposed to correspond to.
Yeah. It's a very sneaky problem. It's a very big problem for scientists and for lay people as well. I mean, a really good way to illustrate this issue is, look, we can be here, we can talk about Antarctica for an hour. I can describe to you all the features of Antarctica, the animals that live there, and the temperature, and what it looks like, and how beautiful it is, and all this sorts of stuff. And the audience could be listening to all that, and they have pictures in their minds about Antarctica, and they've seen it on the map, if they look at the globe and so forth. But none of that is the same thing as actually flying to Antarctica and being there yourself. Right? So that's the key distinction we're making. You can have all sorts of beliefs about Antarctica. You can believe it exists or it doesn't exist. Even if you believe it exists, that's still a belief. Now, you might say, well, but it exists. Well, you believe it does, but you've never actually been there. You don't know if that region on the map corresponds to anything real. And you might also discover that what you see on the map is very different from what you encounter in real life. Like, who knows what's really going on in Antarctica? I mean, it could be a tropical paradise there for all you know, and they're just the government is lying to you because they want to use that real estate for developing weapons or something. You don't really know.
And even beyond that, the map, there are assumptions baked into the map, which is that the shape of the landmass is what matters, and the reality of Antarctica is infinite. But when you get there, it might be the smell. It might be that there's no smell of a factory for 4,000 miles or something like that. So the map has implicit assumptions about what to pay attention to, and Antarctica just is, right? So you get there, and there's an infinite another amount of inputs that you could choose to focus on that might become more important than the shape of the overall landmass.
Yeah, and also you have to also notice how much detail is lost with a map or with a model. Mm-hmm. Like, compared to what you see on the globe, if you go to Antarctica, it's so much richer. It's infinitely richer and more complex than anything that a little picture of it, or even a 2-hour explanation of it from someone who's been there, reveals to you. And so I guess the entire point of this conversation is that we're going to be talking about a lot of theoretical abstract stuff here at times. But ultimately, the point is that we're talking about this stuff so that you can go to the places that we're trying to point you towards. So just open your mind to the possibility that there is a place you can go to where you can actually have all these insights in direct consciousness. Like, you can have direct consciousness of absolute truth. You can experience states of omniscience in which you become conscious of the entire functioning of the universe and how it works and why it exists and where it came from. And that's not just speculation. It's not just philosophy. You can actually do that, but you have to work at it. Like, getting to Antarctica is not easy. You see, like, it can be expensive. It can be perilous to your health. It can be dangerous. It can be cold, uncomfortable, and so all that comes with this work. So a lot of people, they want to talk about this work, but they don't want to do the work.
Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.